Now for time to sit, close your eyes, however you come to focus best. I have today from Stacy Elza, Beatitudes, that is, blessed sayings, for the neurodivergent. Blessed are the unfocused, for they notice the sparks of divinity that illuminate the world. Blessed are those who mourn their failures, for God will exalt their unseen successes. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for novelty, for they seek the marvels of God's handiwork and will be satisfied. Blessed are the forgetful, for God will forget their transgressions and remember their mercy. Blessed are the idle, for they have befriended God. Blessed are the blunt, for they will be called God's messengers. And blessed are those who sow chaos for righteousness' sake, for they will reap justice. Blessed are the risk takers, for the paths they forge will lead to the kingdom of heaven. Good morning, my fellow congregants. This is not ad-libbed, but it's a lot funnier now. I hope the dogs in your life have recovered from last night's fireworks. And I guess also sparks of romance, right? Well, I'd like to thank our Reverend Jonathan Yun for inviting me to speak, and special thanks to my worship associate, Megan Moyer, and our Live Oak administrator, Melanie, and their assistance preparing and performing the service this morning. I also want to express how grateful I am to have some time to speak on some personal experiences with ADHD, as well as the broader phenomena that is neurodivergence and where it intersects with divinity. I hope my words resonate with you, your heart, and our whole beautiful congregation this morning, but it's okay if they don't. I think it's fair to say that the flurry of new terms from the social sciences and its activist intersections can be overwhelming, especially with words that are often similar or derived from the same root. And for example, in the case of neurodivergence, there comes neurodiversity and neurotypicality as well. Neurodiversity accounts for the neurological diversity of the human experience, which itself is overwhelming. Think about all the different kinds of minds and personalities you've encountered on the journey so far. A lot of strange folks, huh? In an academic paper entitled Neurodivergence-Informed Therapy, researchers Chapman and Botha distinguish between neurotypical and neurodivergent with clarity that non-academics, probably the minority in this room anyways, can understand. On the neurodiversity paradigm, people are either closer, albeit in an endless variety of ways, to being more neurotypical or more neurodivergent, depending on how well they conform to normative expectations of a given society. Some neurodivergent groups then form neurominorities, which refers to a minority neurocognitive group or disadvantage in a particular society. This reconceptualizes disabilities such as autism, ADHD, and developmental coordination disorder in line with how cultural, ethnic, and sexual minorities are conceptualized. It may also help to separate the neuro prefix So we're left with diversity, typical, and divergent. And all but certainly, you have someone in your life who is neurodivergent. You might be yourself, and that's a beautiful, wonderful, and I would argue today, divine thing. Neurodivergence is not only the production of hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution, but, as I hope to impart to you today, a central aspect of where the divine shines out in our humanity. But that doesn't mean being a, so to speak, demigod is easy. And another ad lib here in my research for this homily, I just want to say we need more girls and women who are demigods, but we'll get to that. This morning, I'd like to talk about some anecdotes and examples of the neurodivergent experience and these superpowers which have blessed some recognizable mythological and classical characters. I'll also give some personal anecdotes as well, and these classical exempla will include selections from Heracles' 12 Labors and Jesus of Nazareth as found in the Gospel of Mark. And don't worry, this Jesus is not going to hurt you. I realize several Jesuses have hurt many people, and in this case, it might be better thought of maybe a trickster deity, if that makes sense, rather than big hulking American Jesus with guns and whatnot. I was expecting more laughs. Okay. I think it is worth acknowledging that our spiritual ancestors, such as the Pilgrims and Congregationalists, used Jesus as a cudgel for centuries to shame and guilt people into conformity, not unlike what neurodivergent people experience today. This irreparably hurt millions of people, back then and today. But whenever we gather in a holy place like this, I believe we as a community have a chance to unlearn shame. And that is a powerful, life-giving thing. ADHD, that is attention deficit disorder, and formerly known as attention, that's really funny. ADHD, that is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and formerly known as attention deficit disorder, or ADD, is a cornerstone of neurodiversity in humans. Its mountains high, its valleys low, filled to the brim with the fullness of the human mind. But at any one moment, a flood of new ideas rushes in to fill the landscape, and the world is awash in newness. That is to say, the dog ate my homework after I forgot to put the 10th grade algebra worksheets in my backpack because I woke up late, and I ran out the door. I woke up late. I was up late and missed sleep over reading about my special interests or building an immaculate recreation of the Arc de Triomphe in Minecraft, cleaning up after the model train set, or just working on another school project that engages my mind more. ADHD is classified as a neurodevelopmental disorder that has been linked more to genetic factors than de novo, that is, new mutations first present in the subject, or environmental factors. However, this classification is not without controversy or pushback. A cynical, dare say, neurotypical response may be denial. ADHD isn't real. They just want to sell you meds. You're just hyper, or the classic, but you always did well in school. The latter reflecting this cartoonish caricature of ADHD, a 6-year-old roughly resembling Calvin of Bill Watterson's 1990s comic strip Calvin and Hobbes, for those who remember, who has trouble focusing at school and lost in his own little world of cardboard boxes and space monsters and sugar. But I believe that the thinking out of the box regarding ADHD can also be helpful, not necessarily dismissive. ADHD is more than just its medical model, to deploy a term from disability studies. And as ADHD advocate and progressive Tom Hartman first said in 1992, ADHD is a hunter's mindset in a farmer's world. Society as it exists today is not built to accommodate everyone. But if we consider neurodivergence to be nothing but an umbrella term for mental disabilities, this kind of thinking, that has led to the forced hospitalization of millions during the height of the eugenics movement. And before I go on, I need to acknowledge the harm that Unitarians and Universalists committed by supporting the eugenics movement, if you didn't know, with both denominations before the 1961 merger playing a hand in its advancement. From Unitarians in positions of power like President William Howard Taft and Reverend Clarence Skinner, down to individual Universalists such as a Mr. Homer Gleason, a congregant of First Universalist Church of Rochester, Minnesota. Our spiritual ancestors supported this cause for decades. And in fact, more often than evangelicals. When has that ever happened? That congregant, Mr. Gleason, a layperson like you and me, wrote in a sermon contest hosted by the American Eugenics Society that I have thought for years I was somewhat of a eugenicist, but 5 months of intensive study have thoroughly convinced me, surely, that this is a great cause. Some boos would be in order. So let them without sin cast the first stone applies to UUs too. Eugenics held back any credible research and advocacy for decades, while diminishing society's capacity for compassion, for justice, and inclusivity towards the neurodivergent. But today, with love at the center and emphasizing the UU values of equity, justice, and pluralism especially, we as Unitarian Universalists of the 21st century have a chance to embrace neurodivergences like ADHD, not shun them. Even though there's some members of the Kennedy family today who want to continue to shun them, but they have their own skeletons in their closets, right? Hyperactivity, a central experience of ADHD, is divinely human, a human divinity. The question of where humanity ends and divinity starts, or vice versa, has been a concern for lay spiritual communities such as churches like this, theologians, mystics, and revolutionaries for millennia. Forebears of our faith traditions, such as the early church fathers of 2nd, 3rd, and 4th centuries, and their rival Valentinian, Manichaean, and other so-called Gnostic counterparts, would argue prolifically over the divinity of Jesus of Nazareth, for example. Is he man or God? Both? One at a time? Neither? An emanation of God on earth, of all gods? While we may not agree on a single answer, we are still left with determining for ourselves where humanity and divinity ends, or if there is a distinction at all. And there are so many ways to get distracted, so many causes to support, so many situations to be in despair over. It is hard to know where to start, but as ever capable humans are, we are made for these times. But for the sake of clarity and finding a place to land this sermon, let's start with hyper-focusing, shall we, on one thing at a time. If hyperactivity is a human divinity, how does the ADHD experience relate to these existential and theological questions? Alternatively, how can we look at mythological, classical stories through the lens of ADHD? I believe that the late filmmaker David Lynch gave us an idea of how to wrestle with all different thoughts and ideas in his book, Catching the Big Fish. Ideas are like fish, Lynch writes. If you want to catch the little fish, you can stay in the shallow water, but if you want to catch the big fish, that is, you've got to go deeper. Down deep, the fish are more powerful and more pure. They're huge and abstract, and they're very beautiful. So let's reel some in, shall we? So, for example, the Greek demigod Heracles, or in Latin, Hercules, or Disney, that works too, had 12 lavers to complete. According to the 1st or 2nd centuries Bibliotheca, compiled by Apollodorus or someone impersonating him, in a fit of divine rage beset by Heracles' stepmother and mother-in-law, yeah, it's one of those stories, Hera, goddess of marriage and the hearth, He killed his first wife, Megara, and their children. Upon Hera's possession subsiding, Heracles was overcome by grief, and the Oracle of Delphi mandated that he needed to perform what were essentially acts of community service for his mortal cousin, Eurystheus, to atone for the murder of Megara and their kids. While I hope that last detail is extremely unrelatable for everyone here, I think we can all think of a time during our life where we had several daunting tasks to complete, especially while grieving, and how hard it is to juggle everything life throws at us. Degree programs, cleaning the garage, starting a new garden, or keeping up with the affairs of a deceased loved one. A few common obstacles which can have a million moving parts. And for the ADHD mind, the hunter and the farmer's world, as it were, we want to be acutely aware of everything all the time and to do everything all at once. It wants to hunt the mind. But there can only be so much one attention span can hold. Heracles knew that then, and we know it now, hopefully. And yet, no matter how strange, horrifying, or arduous the 12 labors were, from capturing the Cretan bull or stealing 3 golden apples, the demigod Heracles used this very human aspect of divinity, hyperactivity, to adapt, to change midstream, and essentially use a lot of hunter skills to complete these tasks for his cousin. As Apollodorus closes these sections in his Bibliotheca, Heracles, after showing Cerberus to Eurystheus, carried him back to Hades. That's a gigantic, demonic, 3-headed dog, by the way. Also more dogs, I guess. Wonder if Cerberus is gay too. We'll find out. Despite all the odds and overwhelming grief, Heracles tackled each task one at a time. Even a demigod must lock in. While the example I give from Heracles' 12 labors show a demonstration of hyperactivity's strengths, I would like to, bless you, more or less in closing, I want to present an episode from the life and times of Jesus of Nazareth, not that Jesus, we've been over this, to demonstrate a painful aspect of ADHD. But first, who's hungry? Raise of hands. Okay. Well, I'm sure you're all the more ready for post-church Sunday brunch. In the meantime, you can have some of my Markan sandwich. That is, the author of the Gospel of Mark, in a very ADHD way, uses a certain structure for plot Bs in the narrative. Throughout the text, Mark will start with one story, then start a second, then go back to the first. A sandwich. The following quotations are from a New Testament translation by a progressive and universalist theologian, David Bentley Hart. From the first of these sandwiches in Mark, chapter 3, Jesus' family tries to contain him because he is beside himself. That is to say, out of sorts or even mentally ill. Then scribes coming down from Jerusalem claim he's demon-possessed. He has Beelzebul in him, and he exorcises demons by the archon of the demons. That is like the king of the demons, I guess, which Jesus refutes with parables among them. If a kingdom be divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. Again, very apt analogy for the ADHD mind in crisis. And lastly, in this scene, really the next scene, his mother and brothers find him before a crowd, and they exclaim, "Look, your mother and your brothers, our sisters, and your sisters are outside looking for you." And in reply, he says to them, "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?" And looking around at those sitting in a circle, he says, "Look, my mother and my brothers, whoever does the will of God, that one is my brother and sister and mother." So what I would argue here that Jesus feels and expresses is rejection sensitivity, right? because they're looking for him, but they're like, it's not a very reassuring way. It's like, he's kind of out of his mind. Let's like reel him in, maybe get him into the hospital or something, right? They're not taking him seriously, in other words. And rejection sensitivity for ADHDers can manifest as acting defensive, ruminating on rejection, whether real or not, catastrophizing interactions with others, and or masking their reaction to the rejection across different aspects of their lives. The seeds of rejection sensitivity can often sprout in childhood, with adults acting dismissive, intolerant, or, assuming the worst of many, may even, oh, there we go. Sorry, I skipped a few lines. With adults acting dismissive, intolerant, or assuming the worst of the ADHD child. Jesus, a human like you and me, a demigod to many, may have even experienced rejection sensitivity. Later in Mark, he says, a prophet is not dishonored except in his own native country and among his own kin, in his household. But between you and me, I'd like it better put just, a prophet is not welcome in his hometown, right? I'm sure some of us can relate to that. That is all to say, Jesus was no stranger to rejection. It is a painful part of being human and being ADHD, especially if you insist on being your honest self. And looking out in this world today, specifically the horrors, the people in Palestine and Israel, and I actually meant to say Iran, but some Freudian slip, I guess, are subject to, it is no great stretch to imagine the human Jesus feeling rejected today, as the radical empathy of the Gospels is rejected in favor of cheap identitarian politics, hell-bent on destroying our world. You could also say Christo-fascism, if you want to be bold. And we all know that is overwhelming. AI slop fills our news feeds with fake, soulless, and at worst, harmful images and videos, all the while. Data centers, real or perceived, threaten to eat up even more and more energy, only with the ultimate goal of supplanting human jobs and the indirect goal of hurting the environment. So if there is one message I impart onto you today as I draw the sermon to a close, it is simply one. One thing at a time, one day at a time, one night at a time. Breaking down one big thing into smaller tasks, and then doing those one at a time. This is how we move mountains. And here we are all children of what the ancient Gnostics would have called the pleroma, or the fullness, everything in the universe. The story we write this day forward as a congregation, as a community, doesn't have to end after 12 labors of Mark and sandwiches. But I believe that the embrace of neurodivergence is essential in our growing capacity to see the divinity in every human. And with that, a lotus for you, a Buddha to be, so mote it be, blessed be. Amen. What have we got after?